The Soul Web. Written and narrated by Stephen M. Netto. Chapter 1. Meeting. Ice ringed the puddles on the cobblestone street. The clouds, an angry gray earlier, shone in the sky in layers of crimson and yellow, brightening the heavens, but doing nothing to push away the chill. Jaren watched his footing carefully. He had already taken a nasty fall, and his elbow ached with every bump. Not long ago, Jaren had been clearing away snow from the library stoop and breaking ice in the well-water bucket. Now it was warmer during the day, bringing hope that the winter was finally over. Master Librarian Saris had ordered the delivery of a letter. As the sun had begun to set, he had come into the study to find Jaren, Elian, and Karas arguing and laughing over the translation of an ancient tome. Saris had instructed Karas to make the delivery, but when Jaren saw the address, he begged for the task. The letter, having only arrived moments before, still had an unbroken wax seal, 2 eagles facing each other and surrounded by a ring of leaves. With a black smudge, the address on the folded parchment read, "To Arner Onstriker." Popular at the library, Arner was no stranger to Jaren. Quick with a jest and quicker to laugh at it, Arner was always open for discussions and easy with his stories. For days he would stay at the library, and with each of his visits he would attend lessons, sitting in silence, scrawling notes into books produced from his pockets. Tall for a dwarf at just over 4 feet, he still came to the height of only the 4th shelf in a bookcase. He was a scholar, a businessman, a fighter, a jester, and often a drunk. Jaren was eager to see him most of all because Arner had been a friend of Jaren's father. However, of all the things Arner might be, there was something he was not. Here. Jaren frowned, his eyes scanning over the faces in the market. Among the merchants closing their wagon shops and patrons trying to make a deal on the day's unsold wares, a group of armored men caught Jaren's attention. It wasn't that armor was all that uncommon, but most didn't strap it on to visit the market. Strangers were common in the port city of Westmost, but this group looked ready for a fight. Broken in like a pair of boots that had to be worn to fit correctly, they stood in sharp contrast to the brightly clothed people of the city. As if they were expecting to see someone, 3 of them were looking the crowd over. The 4th appeared to be asleep, leaning against the wall, his balding head down and his arms folded on his chest in front of him. Jaren's eyes did a double-take when he reached the 5th member of the group. The 5th member wasn't sleeping or searching the crowd. He was looking straight back at Jaren. Unnerved at being on the receiving end of such a stare, and ashamed for having been caught staring himself, Jaren's ears reddened and he turned away to resume his search for Arner. He looked down alleys, peered into shops, turned around more than one dwarf, and stood on his tiptoes to scan over the people of the market. So intent was Jaren in his search that he failed to notice the man walking up behind him, and started when he felt a hard poke on the shoulder. "Boy!" Jaren turned and saw the warrior who had been staring at him. His deep brown eyes looked Jaren over. "What is your given name?" Surprised by the question, Jaren asked, "Excuse me, sir?" Another question came. "Your father, what is his name?" Which was in quick succession followed by, "How old are you?" and "Your mother, what is her name?" Caught off guard by the personal questions, Jaren stared with his mouth slightly ajar. He had been expecting from the force of the poke a scolding about how he should be minding his own business. The man looked at him intently. "Yaru, don't pester the boy," came a sharp voice from behind Jaren. Standing in the kitchen doorway to the broken horse was Arner, his blue eyes shining at Jaren. His black and gray beard hung low, and in his brimmed hat was a long red feather. Striding forward, Arner said, "Hello there, Jaren. I see you've a letter for me. And how did you know I was in the city?" I didn't know, sir," said Jaren. "I mean, until Master Saris instructed me to look for you in the market." "Saris has his nose in more than is good for him. Very well, then, hand me the letter, boy," said Arner, smiling. Jaren held it out. Arner took it and inspected the seal on the front. The smile left his face, but returned quickly. "Just a moment," Arner said to Jaren, and held out his hand to the warrior who had been questioning the boy. "Yaru, my friend, what are you doing in Westmost?" Yaru took the hand of Arner, but used the grip to pull the dwarf a short distance away, where the two held a conversation that progressed into a hushed but heated argument. Yaru grabbed Arner by the shirt, lifting him off his feet, causing Arner's hat to fall off his head. Yaru spoke quietly and put the dwarf back down. Glaring at Yaru, Arner picked up his hat and brushed it off. "Well?" said Yaru. Arner handed over the letter, placing the hat firmly back on his head. Jaren watched Yaru's face as he broke the seal. Reading in silence, his expression of anger turned to sadness. After a few moments, the warrior, bending on one knee, reached into a pouch and pulled something out, holding it in front of the confused dwarf. Arner snatched the item and held it close for inspection, his eyes widening to the size of silver coins. Yaru handed the letter back and waited until Arner finished reading it before he said, "I arrived this morning on a boat heading south from Berthiliost. I've been ordered east to Denshire. Goblins are crossing the Fortunal Mountains from the south, and I've been sent to investigate. I expected you would be in Westmost. I was correct." Arner held up the item he had snatched from Yaru. "What about this?" "Once I have made my initial contacts, I will try to find him," said Yaru, looking at the letter in Arner's hand. Arner nodded as Yaru walked away and whispered with his companions. They were looking toward the inn, trying to get a glimpse of Jaren before they moved off, finally disappearing into the crowd. "Come inside." Arner pulled Jaren into the kitchen of the Broken Horse. "Listen to me, boy." Arner shut the door behind them. "It is important that you do as I say. I'm going to walk out of the front door of this inn in a few moments. I need you to stay here until I've been gone for at least 2 hours. He stopped and put his hands over his eyes for a moment, letting out a drawn sigh. "No. Wait until closing and then leave with the other customers. Then go back to the library. I'll meet you there." Arner shook his head in frustration. "Broken hammer. He shouldn't have sent you." He inspected the seal on the paper again, and with a glance out of the window, tucked it into his shirt. "It seems that there's more to this business than just the delivery, and now you've been thrown straight into it, and sooner than I'd wished. There's much to explain." "Why? What's going on?" "You're going on a trip," Arner said. Arner wasn't paying attention to Jaren's inquisition. "Where are we going?" Jaren asked. "I'll fill you in when we are back at the library, but I must go now. Walk back to the library. Don't run. The less you do to attract attention to yourself, the better." "What are you talking about?" "You wouldn't believe me if I told you, unless you saw them for yourself, and even then." His voice trailed off. "Remember, walk. Don't run. I'll meet you at the library tonight if I can lose them." He started toward the door but stopped himself. "Eat something while you wait. Make sure you sample the ale. In fact, have 2. The streets were quiet when Jaren left the Broken Horse. The temperature had dropped and he could see his breath as he exhaled. He stepped into the market square, now empty, and rubbed his arms against the chill. The company at the Broken Horse had been excellent. Patrons had talked about local problems, feuds between local businessmen and the guilds. He had enjoyed the food, much better fare than he was accustomed to as an apprentice of the library. The dark brown ale had tasted good, though bitter at first. Jaren cursed himself for ordering a second flagon. He wasn't sure of his balance anymore. Just concentrate, he thought. 1 foot at a time. The last 2 customers of the Broken Horse walked away, arm in arm, singing together as they held each other up. "Walking into spider webs, and I cannot feel my legs. I hope I didn't take the spider. She was just protecting her eggs." Walking the cobblestones of the square, Jaren himself hummed the tune, one sung at the inn by a tanked-up priest. Jaren stopped short, remembering. "I didn't pay my bill." He looked behind him to find that the gas lamps of the Broken Horse were out. "Tomorrow," he said aloud to himself, turning back to his path, only to stop again. The street lanterns were dark. Walking by the moonlight so far, he had not noticed that the lanterns in this part of town were supposed to be lit by dusk. He looked behind him. Yes, he had walked past 2 of them, both dark. Turning back towards the library, he picked up his pace. It had to be at least 11:30. The lanterns normally burned away the night before their oil was exhausted. He had even seen some still burning after dawn. Either they hadn't been lit, or someone had put them out. Pushing goosebumps down his arms and spine, a cold draft hit the back of Jaren's neck. He shivered it away. His sandals interrupted the stillness of the night, scratching along the cobblestones, sounding as loud as booming thunder to Jaren's ears. A feeling that someone was following began to overcome him, but whenever he turned to look, the way behind him was always empty. "Arnor's having a joke on me," he thought. "Spooked me." Jaren stopped between two buildings and looked behind him. No one was there. Feeling foolish, he leaned back against the wall of the alley and shook his head, smiling quietly at himself. Jaren could picture Arnor crying with laughter at the way he was jumping at every shadow. Then Jaren bumped into one. It was cold. "He's late, Ceres." Arnor was pacing the office of the librarian. "I don't like it." It wasn't like Jaren to be late. Ceres summoned his second man. "I want you to send Elian and Karas out to look for Jaren. He should be between here and the Broken Horse. Be quick." Thin and tall, Ceres was more a man of brain than muscle. He had been the master librarian for 20 years. At not quite 50 years old, he was still a man that commanded attention when he wanted it. Ceres strode back into his office. "Arnor, you should have come here first when you arrived in town instead of stopping for a drink." "And you should have known I was probably being followed," shot back Arnor. "That seal on the envelope should have told you that. Are all of these books starting to clutter your head so that you don't recognize the seal of Keltanon when you see it?" Noticing the drop in Ceres's posture, Arnor felt a twinge of guilt and backed off. "Anyway, the road was long and I was thirsty." Ceres smiled at the gesture, but knew that he had made a mistake. "It would figure, after all of these years, I would send Jaren on an errand at precisely the wrong time. I should have made Karas bring it as I intended." "Where is the letter now?" Ceres asked. "Here." Arnor patted his chest pocket. "Have you verified the ring Yaru gave you against the seal?" "Yes." "May I?" Arnor produced the ring from his pocket. "Yaru acquired it from one of his spies, who said that she had removed it from the finger of a goblin near the city of Elendon. He wants to head south to discover more, but Yaru has been ordered east to Denshire with 4 men. Apparently, the Markle goblins have been crossing the Fortunal mountain range." "That's odd. Why wouldn't they just use the Temarak Pass?" "Maybe they're planning an attack on the Nargjes goblins." "Not likely. I would expect the aggression to travel the other way with goblins. Markle tribes have never been fond of conflict." "When Yaru is finished investigating, he will head south to find word of that letter." "You're headed north to Starkwall?" "As soon as possible." "I will send a pigeon to prepare for your arrival." Jaren opened his eyes and found that he was looking straight up. The stone blocks of the alley wall stretched up into the star-filled sky. Slowly, he rolled to his belly and pressed his hands against the ground to stand. His joints creaked like an old man's, or like one who has spent too much time outside in a winter wind. His head felt dizzy and tingled with a feeling Jaren could only equate to how your hand feels when it falls asleep, unattached and somehow alien. Bringing his feet under him, Jaren stood, stumbled, leaned against the wall, and fell back down again. He looked around him. Whatever he had bumped into was gone. At least he didn't have to deal with it, whatever it was. The only sound he heard was the calling of his name from far off. His friends were looking for him. "Karas!" he tried to yell, letting out only a croak. "Elian!" he tried to say, but only vomited. Digging deep, Jaren brought himself back to his hands and knees, still trying to answer the call of his friends. He crawled out of the alley and lay there, out of breath, feeling the cold of the cobblestones before passing again into unconsciousness. Sounds of a crackling fire and a muffled conversation woke Jaren. Ceres and Karas were having a discussion, or, from the sound, a disagreement. Looking around, Jaren realized that he was back at the library. He looked around again. This was the bedchamber of the master librarian. The fireplace glowed with a flickering light. Something was steaming in a pot near the flames, creating a smell similar to fall leaves being broken when they become too brittle and dry. His head still had the pins and needles feeling, but it was not as strong as it had been in the alley. Jaren sat up, swung his legs over the left side of the bed, and tried to stand. He managed it, though the dizziness was still there. "What are you doing up?" Arnor almost yelled at him as he entered the room. "Rest!" "This isn't my room." Arnor smiled before answering. "I know that." He moved over to inspect the steaming black pot. "But we need the fireplace." "This is the master's room. I should go back to the dormitory." "You'll lie back down and stay there. Master Sirius hasn't slept in here for the past month." "That's ridiculous. I brought him breakfast only this morning and set it on the table myself." "That was a month ago." "What? You really don't remember any of it?" Arner said, wafting the steam from the pot with the lid. "Any of what?" Jaren asked. "For the past month, you haven't said a word, haven't left this room. You've been walking and eating and drinking, but it was as if you weren't here. It was like your body was here, but your mind was somewhere else." Jaren sat back down on the bed. The steam from the pot on the fire smelled good, removing some of the fog in his head. "What happened to me? After I left the Broken Horse, I was convinced someone was following me, but there was never anyone there when I turned to look." Arner sat down in the chair near the fire and stirred the pot. Jaren continued. "I didn't believe you, you know. I thought you were trying to scare me for a laugh, but then I bumped into cold, dark, well," he stammered, searching for the best description he could think of, "air. It felt like walking into winter from summer all at once." Jaren took a drink of the water from the cup on the bedside table. "That was a shade, boy," Arner said without moving his eyes from the pot. "A what?" "Shades are the shadows of demons. They come here to accomplish a mission of some kind. The ale dimmed its effect on you. Maybe that's why you're still here. You would have died even from the minimal exposure you had." "What is something so horrible doing in Westmost?" "It was looking for you." "Me? Why?" "They don't know it's you they're after," Arner mused to himself. "What? Why is this thing after me?" "I think that's why the shade left after touching you," Arner said. "It didn't really know who you are." "And just who am I?" asked Jaren, exasperated at not being answered. Arner stood, walked to the cabinet in the corner, pushed a stool into place, climbed up and pulled down a bottle of brandy and a glass from the top shelf. He poured a generous helping and put the bottle back. As he climbed down from the stool, he asked, "What do you know of your mother?" "Just what I was told by my father. She died when I was 1 or 2, trying to have another baby. Her name was Hala." Arner carried the stool with him across the room and handed the glass to Jaren. He climbed up onto the stool and sat on it, feet dangling. "And your father, what do you know of him?" "A blacksmith by trade. He died of fever 7 years ago when I was 9. I was already apprenticed to the library, so I didn't get to see him much, really. But I remember him." "Do you now? That's good," said Arner, smiling and reaching for the glass. "Do you remember his name?" "Loren." Jaren wasn't looking at Arner and took a sip from the glass of brandy. It burned as he swallowed. He took a deep breath and exhaled it slowly, grimacing. "This is awful." "The brandy was for me." Arner pointed to the water on the bedside table. "That one's for you." Jaren handed the glass to Arner and picked up the water. "Anyway," Arner said, shaking his head, "his name wasn't Loren, though we called him that. It was Lorenus del Keltanon, and he didn't die 7 years ago." "Excuse me?" Jaren asked, blinking. "And your mother's name was not Hala. It was Estariel, and she did not die in childbirth as you believe, but was murdered by the enemies of your father." Jaren sat staring, mouth open, the water in his hand forgotten. "You were nearly 3 then," explained Arner. "I don't understand. What? Why would a blacksmith have enemies?" The questions tongue-tied Jaren. "My father didn't die? Is he still alive then? Where is he?" Jaren stood up, feeling lightheaded but determined. Leaning forward on his stool, Arner gently pushed Jaren back until the boy sat heavily on the bed again, nearly spilling his drink. "It's a long story to tell, and it's late. Yes, he may still be alive, but I don't think so. That letter," he pointed to the bedside table where he had placed the piece of parchment along with the silver and red ring, "was written almost 8 weeks ago by Loren. He was alive then, at least. Tomorrow we need to sneak you out of Westmost." "Sneak me out of Westmost?" "You already look too much like your mother, and you're even getting to look like your father as well." Jaren's memory sparked. "That man in the market asked me about them." "Yeah, his name is Yaru. I still can't believe he picks you out like that. It's been 15 years since he's seen you. Though he was only 10 at the time, and you just a toddler. You do look like your mother. He, said Arner, is your uncle. Your mother was his elder sister. Jaren was not any less confused. I don't have any family. My father told me I had no other family. Why would he lie? The next question that came to his mind caught in his throat as he tried to ask it, and his eyes blurred. He left me. Why did he leave me? Look, son, he did. Arner corrected himself. We did this to protect you, and would have been successful for a good many years if... He trailed off again. It's time to move you to a stronger location, Arner said as he got down from the stool. You need to sleep. He headed for the door. You're not making a lot of sense, Arner. We've hidden you well up till now. Those shades are after you because of who you are, or more correctly, who your father is, and who his father was before him. And who am I? You are Jaren Tho Keltanon. Arner opened the door and turned to face Jaren. You are a king.